The Bear is powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 236, presented by Prize Picks. Go use the promo code CLNS to get $100 cash back on your first deposit. Going into game one of the finals between the Celtics and Mavs, there is a square for Jason Tatum for more than 0.5 points. So all he needs is to get 1 point. I don't know if you watch the NBA. I don't know if you watch basketball. I don't know if you know who Jason Tatum is. Feels like a pretty good bet, that a pretty good spot there that he's going to have at least 1 point in this game. So go add that to your squares over at Prize Picks. We're also sponsored by Game Time Tickets. Use that promo code CLNS to get $20 off your first purchase. My name is Conor Ryan, and as you can see, we're going to roll with another solo pod today. Again, we're at this point of the off season. Not a whole lot going on with the Bruins. There's some rumors here and there. We've discussed the Jacob Chikrin rumor with Lena Zolmar. We've discussed Marty Necas. Evan and I discussed, looking at the New Jersey Devils and whether they could move the number 10 overall pick in a trade for Ullmark. We've covered a lot of those things. And again, it's not anything tangible right now. So as we try to speed things up here a little bit and get moving towards the fun stuff, the actual tangible stuff of looking at the NHL draft and looking at free agency and all that stuff that, again, all seems to be bunched together at the end of June, early July. Maybe let's just roll with the standard path that we go to during these solo pods and do a little bit of a mailbag here. So as always, I reached out to the fine people on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days, and asked for some input, asked for a few questions of the Bruins, where they are right now at this point of the offseason. What do you like to see from this team moving forward? So might as well just dive right into it, right? What else are we going to talk about? What else am I going to say to you guys as I speak into the void here for these questions? So let's lead off with a question from Brian at Rusty Graham, who asked, given cap room picks, prospects, and roster, Bees have a lot of options. Correct. What's the one player you want them to get the most via trade, signing, whatever? Oh, well, first of all, thank you for the question, Brian. Who do I want? Well, it's obvious. It's Leon Draisaitl. What are we talking about here? No, again, I feel like once we get to the Draisaitl discourse, one, we have to see what the Oilers do, and two, I feel like Draisaitl discourse is going to be my break glass in case of emergency. Right? If we're at that point, it means we have nothing else to talk about. I don't see it being a really tangible thing that's going to happen. Rarely have players of that caliber either get dangled on the market or hit free agency. Would be great. I just don't see it, to be honest with you. But in terms of realistic options for this offseason, I think the obvious one's got to be Elias Lindholm, and we've talked about him quite a bit, so I won't go through the usual spiel, but I just think you look at where that's an upgrade of a spot on the depth chart. The Bruins desperately need someone else in there. And Elias Lindholm is a guy that should be able to impact the game positively for this team, and not just his own play, but he makes just so many other guys better around him, not just the guys on his line. But if you get Lindholm and you're able to move Zacha further down the lineup, you're able to move him to wing where he thrived in that first year with that all check line. If you're able to, again, I think the best case scenario is moving Charlie Coyle, who, again, showed this past year that he can be a capable top six player when needed. But if all of a sudden you have this guy who had a career year and you can put him back down on the third line, and your third line next year is Morgan Geekie, Charlie Coyle, Trent Frederick, it's a pretty good third line. That's a line that I think you feel really good about. And we'll talk about Matt Poitras. We've had a few questions about him as well. But if you're just looking for a veteran established grouping there in your bottom six, you cannot go wrong with what a grouping of Coyle, Frederick, and Geekie can provide you. in these games. So a lot to like about, not just Lindholm, what he provides in terms of his defensive game, which the Bruins obviously prioritize. You look at his faceoff numbers, which are an automatic upgrade. That's something you desperately need further up in the lineup to get that off, get that puck possession. But I just think also Lindholm has more to give. And yes, like in a perfect world, is he a bona fide franchise top line center? Probably not, but he's probably, you know what he is? He's a lot better than what he was last year, where he was on a dreadful Calgary team, was put out of position for quite a bit during his stint in Vancouver. And then what do you know? They kind of figured out how to use him in the playoffs, and he scored some big goals for them. So even if he's not this top line fixture, if he's your 1C next year and he's your 2C down the road as you're able to continue to assess your options, that's pretty good for a guy that I think is a barometer, can give you 60 points while playing good two-way game, maybe even more. Like maybe he's a 70-point guy if he's stable next to Pastrnak. And I saw a few comments, either was on YouTube with these recordings, or maybe it was on Twitter, X, whatever we're going to call it these days, about how the Bruins don't need a 60-point guy. They need an 80-point guy. So does every other friggin' team in the NHL. Every team would like an 80-point centerman. They don't grow on trees. They're not there in free agency. They're really not there via trade unless it's some guy that takes a huge step forward. So you got to make do with what you have. And if making do with what you have is Elias Lindholm, you got a pretty good player that moves the needle for you. And again, makes so many guys around you better. So I think Elias Lindholm is the obvious pick there. And I'll also put Marty Necas. But Marty Necas, in terms of what I think could be the best case scenario of what the Bruins can get in a trade for Linus Ullmark. And again, you probably have to throw something else in there to make it work. I still don't know whether or not Marty Necas is a centerman. I know he wants to be one, but the numbers don't really reflect that and how he was utilized in Carolina. But that just seems like a trade that if you're not looking at draft capital and you're not looking at like the number 10 pick, if that's something that's available for the Bruins, but if Necas is a guy that you can pick up that is 25, is a talented player, adds to an area of deficiency on your team in terms of scoring punch, playmaking, speed, that would be the Bruins making the most of a situation where they're trading a valuable asset in Ullmark. So I would say that those are the two guys that really stand up to me in terms of realistic options. I would say those are the two guys that, if they're able to get one, if not both, which we'd see how that money would work there, those are the two guys that stand out for me. So once again, thank you for that question. We'll move on now to one from Mama Cars at Patrice Carson, who asks two questions. First of all, do they keep Pat Maroon? And will the Panthers beat the Oilers? Maybe let's work backwards there in terms of Panthers Oilers. I got Panthers in 6. I just think like McDavid and what the how top heavy that team is. And again, it's top heavy, but you've got multiple cheat codes on that Edmonton team that can take over a series. So it would not surprise me if this prediction's wrong. But I just think you look at Florida and how dominant they've been and how deep that team is, where they've got so many guys that can be the hero on any given night. They have defensemen that clog up grade A ice. They can activate down the other end of the ice and make plays. Sasha Barkov is having an unbelievable run for this team right now. It's not like they're, Bobrovsky's made timely saves. Is he still like a world beater in net? No, but you also have Stuart Skinner down the other end of the ice, so it's not really a complete mismatch there. And you give that edge to Bobrovsky in this series. And I just think when you look at just how Florida plays, how physical they are, how relentless they are on the forecheck, and again, when you have someone like McDavid that can just skate out of anything, maybe that's the perfect counter you need. Maybe it's the only team that can counter what Florida does when they're really effective on that forecheck. But I think for me, I'm still going to go Panthers. I still think they're the most complete team, team built for the playoffs, a team that has multiple guys that can take over any given night, whereas you look at the Oilers, if they don't have McDavid or Draisaitl or even maybe Bouchard, especially this run, driving the engines for them, they're kind of stuck on the water. Whereas you look at what Barkov can do, what Kachuk and Verhaeghe and Bennett can do, what Anton Lundell can do, what Gustav Forsling or Brendan Montour. They have so many guys that any given night can really strike and shift the momentum of a game, of a series, of a championship run. So I'm going to go Panthers in 6. That's my prediction now. Would not be surprised if it's wrong, but I think it's going to be a really entertaining series of just how those two teams play, how McDavid does on the stage, and whether or not the Panthers can finally get over the hump this year after coming up short last year. So that's my prediction for the Stanley Cup Final. As for Pat Maroon, it's interesting, right? Because I think you can make a case that the Bruins, if they're trying to save money and use, their cap space effectively, if you tell me that next year the fourth line is some combination of, Beecher, Brazeau is kind of the two fixtures there, and then Lauko, is it Trevor Kuntar? Is it a player like that? You could, like a guy like Riley Duran, make a huge leap forward. Like, there's a lot of guys down, in Providence in the system, and on the team with Beecher and Brazeau and Lauko that could make a lot of sense if you're just going to roll that group and let them develop. And there's should be more to give with guys like Beecher and Brazeau, especially. I still wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins, kick the tires on Maroon and just see what the price is. I think it's the biggest thing. Sweeney also mentioned during his last press conference they had to check on Maroon's health, which see how maybe the state of his back is after going through those procedures. But if like the money's right, and we're talking about league minimum 1 million with incentives, and he can be a guy that maybe he's not in there every single night, but a guy that's a veteran, can pull people in the right direction. I think you saw where his presence was. Maybe he didn't see it on the ice. He didn't, wasn't able to drop the gloves with Sam Bennett, or no one wanted to drop the gloves with him. But his accountability, his way, he talked with the media, the message that he kind of preached in, those two playoff series this spring. Just he does seem like a guy that can bring value. It's just, brings value to the team, brings value to the locker room. It's just how much is that value worth in terms of dollars and cents. So I think the Bruins would love to have him back. Just depends on what the ultimate price is going to be. So thank you for that question. We'll keep on diving into more of these, but before we do that, take a quick break, hear from our good friends over at Prize Picks. The finals are right around the corner, and it's time for you to get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your cash with Prize Picks, as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level with a title on the line. With Prize Picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. When the finals are over, hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is just getting started. With young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Brianna Stewart and Aja Wilson, you can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and a huge selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. And with basketball season still in full swing, there's plenty of opportunity to participate in Prize Picks. This week on Prize Picks, I'm selecting Jaylen Brown for more than 25 points and Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-pointers made. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Again, use code CLNS for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Now, let's get back to the show. Once again, shout out to our good friends over at Prize Picks. All right, let's move on to the next question here. This is from DidoTime13, who asks, would it be prudent for the Bruins to make a trade for Alex Tuch, 2 years left at $4.75 million, as a second-line right wing? Also, could we trade Brendan Carlo, making $4.1 million, and sign Brett Pesce as the second pairing right-handed defenseman? Clear upgrade and probably cost between $5.5 $6.5 million per year. Both moves make us better and tougher to play against and don't eat up tons of cap space. Thoughts? So I would say I'm not moving. I think Brendan Carlo's arguably been probably their most consistent defenseman over the last couple of years. Now that I think it seems like his concussion issues as a whole haven't really spread out too much. I know he dealt with something earlier on this year, but I think you look at what he's making in terms of, that cap hit for a guy that can play 19, 20 minutes a night is great on the PK, is sound in his own end of the ice. I think that's a contract, especially you look at just how much the cap's going to jump up this summer. You look at next year and how much the ceiling's going to jump up more and more. You're going to have more and more of these guys like Kahlo who may not be flashy. You may think that they don't bring a lot of value because they're playing a lot of heavy D zone minutes and a lot of D zone stats, but um, I do think Brendan Kahlo is a guy that contract's already pretty good value, and it should keep on getting better. And when you look at just his age, how he's played the last couple of years, I think that's one spot of the lineup you don't really touch. And again, I think Brett Pesce's a very good player. He's dealt with quite a few injuries, and it's kind of the inverse of Kahlo. He's dealt with a lot of injuries lately. That you look at the mileage he's had, and again, he in his prime the last couple of years with Carolina was a force. Fantastic, underrated defenseman, one of many underrated defensemen on that Carolina team. But you look now at the year he had, the injuries that have kind of popped up lately. I don't think you want to be the team giving him that contract, even though he has had an impressive run. And it just seems like his market right now is going to be interesting to see how it all kind of plays out. But I wouldn't touch Kahlo and replacing him with Pesce. The Tuck one's interesting because I believe it was Elliot Friedman who reported way back when that the Bruins and I think the Rangers had kicked the tires. And that might have been a little bit more of speculation from Elliot's perspective in terms of what teams were reaching out. But he mentioned, I think, that the Bruins and Rangers were two teams that were interested in seeing if Alex Tuck would be available in a trade. And again, if you're looking at acquiring assets through deals like that, Alex Tuck makes a lot of sense if the Bruins are going outside of the box for a guy that, has size. I think he's 6'4", can use that frame to win puck battles, is good at the net front, high motor kind of player that has produced in the past as well, whether it's with Vegas or with Buffalo. Obviously, his went to BC. His brother Luke went to BU, so he's got those ties as well, which seems like you always have to draw those connections when it comes to the Bruins and who they want to target out in free agency or the trade deadline. But that is an interesting one. Like, I feel like the price is going to be steep, and when it comes to the Bruins and what their trade assets are or what have you, that becomes a little bit tougher. So we can talk about Linus Ullmark and what his return is till the cows come home, because that's an obvious one. It's an area the Bruins can part ways with. What's going to be the asking price if the Sabres are really serious about moving on from Alex Tuck? Because again, if the money's right, if the trade assets are right, Bruins would love to have him. But are we talking like Mason Lohrei? Are we talking Nat Patra? Are we talking a player like that? Because again, Tuck makes you better, but do you want to give up some of those blue chip prospects in order to bring him aboard? So I think that's what it comes down to. Maybe we'll hear more about this later on this offseason when it comes to Tuck and whether or not he is available. But that is just something I think it's important to ponder when it comes to the Bruins acquiring a player like that and what it's going to cost, because I really couldn't tell you, but it feels like when you look at what that contract is with Tuck and what the production has been, how his skill set seems to be something that a lot of teams have coveted the last couple of years, I think it's going to be a pretty penny in terms of giving up a pretty good young player or two or three to pry him out of Buffalo. So we'll see how that develops, but that's a good call on your part in terms of bringing up a player like that maybe is outside of the box, but fits the bill as to what the Bruins should be looking at in terms of what players they should be kicking the tires on at this point of the offseason. All right, we move on to the next one. This is from IceFrog67, who asks, what are your thoughts on the potential roles for Lysell, Merkulov, and Patra next year? The Bruins want to generate more offense. They may need to give some dynamic young players a chance on the top three lines. Great question. It is going to be fascinating to see how they approach this, right? Because you make a great point that if the Bruins are looking for more offense, maybe it's the patient approach with some of these players that have kind of shown what they can do, whether it's Patra last year in the NHL during those brief spurts, or what a guy like Merkulov and Lysell have done down in Providence. Like, how much are you going to glean out of, Merkulov and Lysell that continue to put together strong performances during, against AHL competition? Like, we know that Merkulov, if he's playing in Providence next year, is probably going to be a point per game guy. If Lysell's healthy, same thing. But, we saw last year where Merkulov gets called up and he's been playing 8-9 minutes a night. Like, I understand you don't want to throw him into the fire, maybe, but like, what are you going to glean from a player, a playmaking option like Merkulov, if you're not focusing in on giving him some leeway to develop and thrive in those spots? So, um, it's a great point. I could see, especially Potter's case, they give him some time to see if he can get his feet back under him down in Providence and string together some good play, get his confidence growing after suffering that shoulder injury and kind of going through those growing pains in the NHL. So I could see them giving him a little bit of leeway, and again, that can change if he lights things up during training camp or the preseason. But I think, regardless of what the Bruins do this offseason in terms of adding talent on the wing, anything like that, I think it would, do the Bruins well if they do give guys like Lysell and Merkulov just opportunities. That doesn't mean like if they don't show anything in preseason or camp to just give them 14 minutes a night. But if Lysell dominates in a couple of these games, if Merkulov strings together some games, carve out a spot for him. Like have them, again, like look at what Potter did last year, where it's like all the signs pointed to him going back down to junior, made it hard for the Bruins to keep him, away from the NHL team. Like, and again, some of that falls on Lysell and Merkulov. They need to perform in September and October when it comes to fighting for those minutes. But if they hold up their end, I think it would do the Bruins well to give them some leeway. That doesn't mean you staple them into the depth chart and they're playing, 50 games, even if the numbers aren't there. Like, the Bruins, one, already have a good enough team in place and should add more talent to this roster in the months ahead. That, like, if Lysell is we get to February and Lysell's played 50 something games and he's got 4 goals and 11 assists and he's not producing in a featured role, they're not going to keep him in that spot. But I do think it is important to give those guys, if they perform well this preseason, a little bit of a runway to see what they can do. Because, maybe even it's the case where it's, guys like Lysell and Merkulov, it's only natural. As much as we look at these athletes and think they're just so programmed to, go into every year with a clean slate and not think about last year and just accept their role. When you've been in Providence and the AHL for a couple of years and you've been productive and you don't get those minutes, it wears on you. Like, I'm sure if you give them a shot, like Lysell's probably like, I've done what I can in Providence. Let me show you what I can do at the next level. Like, maybe you get something out of that as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Bruins do approach that with those younger players. But I do think it is something that you have to consider, especially if they perform well during preseason action. So that's definitely something to keep tabs on in the months ahead. Before we wrap this one up, let's take another quick break. Hear from our good friends over at Game Time.
Quick break to tell you about my good friends over at Game Time. I am very excited about the NBA playoffs, and what's awesome is here in Boston, Celtics fans make TD Garden the best atmosphere for a playoff game. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Maybe it's the NBA playoffs, or it's the MLB regular season. Once the Celtics wrap up, which hopefully ends with a championship, Fenway Park is a great place to spend a summer day or night. Going from TD Garden playoffs to chill, exciting nights at Fenway Park is one of the best times of the year. With Game Time, there's last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and there's flash deals. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And there are zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. So, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, back to the show.
Once again, shout out to our good friends over at Game Time Tickets. All right, might as well end this with one more question from our mailbag. This one's from Liam McPoyle. I hope not the actual Liam, but He asks, increasing team toughness or scoring depth, both are important, but which is more so to improve this team's playoff success? Great question. Tough question, Liam. But if you ask me, like, one, you can also find ways to address both, right? If you're able to get players that, and again, you're not going to find a Sam Bennett or a player like that on the open market, but guys with speed that can win puck battles, can add more scoring punch. You're able to kind of kill two birds with one stone if you find those players. Now, who is it, right? Is it Elias Lindholm, who, isn't really maybe a bruiser, but has a high motor, addresses an area of need. Chandler Stevenson has a really high motor. He's a guy that could help you out in that regard. So I think the Bruins have to view this as, and it's something that I think you saw with how Neely even mentioned speed. The last couple of years, it's been like getting into inside ice, being more physical. This year was about speed. It's like, I feel like the Bruins probably felt like they had a lot of heft and a lot of size on their team, especially up front. And just because, like, you had Pat Maroon and he wouldn't, he didn't get a heavyweight bout with Sam Bennett, which again, like Sam Bennett wasn't going to fight. Maroon mentioned that, like, he's not going to get an instigator penalty and put his team, at risk in a critical game. Like if you're doing that and you're a Bruins fan, you're pumped about that as the Panthers score 2 power play goals against you in a critical elimination game. I'm sure that feels great. Probably feels great in the moment, and then you wake up the next day and realize that cost you a playoff series and a season. Like that wasn't going to happen at any point when the Panthers were not going to engage back at whatever Maroon was trying to do. So I do think the Bruins have a good maybe foundation in terms of having guys that can do a little bit of both, right? Can impact the game with their speed, and there's more to give in those roles, right? Like even a guy like Johnny Beecher's not a bruiser per se, but he's a big body that skates really well, wins puck battles, and should continue to grow in that role. So when you look at the guys they already have on this roster, like a Beecher, like a Geeky, who's able to land some hits, he's not like a bruiser or a brawler or anything like that. Frederick, guys like that. And you're able to maybe like add just one more guy on the blue line that can provide that, like a Brendan Dillon, someone like that. I think you're in a pretty good spot toughness wise. And again, we'll cycle back on this. If the Bruins get out muscled in a playoff series next year, bring this back and call me out on it. But I think in terms of the most obvious thing, it's got to be the scoring depth. I think it was Jim Montgomery said you can't win games 2-1 in the playoffs every single night. And I do think that's the easiest avenue for the Bruins in terms of, getting themselves over the hump. I think they have some toughness. They have a little bit of grit to their team. You can always add to it. And I think they'll find guys that can maybe do a little bit of both, as I mentioned before. But I do think you just need more scoring punch. You can't win all these games this close. You can't put all of the burden on Jeremy Swayman to bail you out night in and night out. It's just not feasible, not tenable. It's not a winning formula. So if you had to ask me, I would say scoring depth, it has to be probably the more critical thing right now at this stage of the offseason. So that will do it for our latest solo mailbag episode. I always enjoy doing these. I always enjoy getting all these questions. You guys always nail it with what you're sending along in terms of the top topics of the day, what we should focus on, all that good stuff. So thank you all so much for, sending along those questions, listening in, all that stuff. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Poke the Bear. So I'm Conor Ryan. You fans have a great rest of your week.